What's up everybody, Steven here with Neural DSP, and today I'm going to show you how I would set up a live rig in Pro Tools. Now this is going to be applicable to either physical or digital performances. And since so many of you seem to be interested in the digital aspect of this, I'm actually going to turn it into a two-parter. The first part is basically just going to be MIDI integration and routing in Pro Tools. The next episode, I'll focus on automating your presets to a backing track, as well as getting your audio over to software such as OBS so you can live stream to the platform of your choice. I'll be using Pro Tools and relating the information as best I can so you can implement this in your own DAW. But if you want to see me do the same thing in a different DAW, go ahead and leave comments down below and let me know the DAW of your choice. If there's enough interest in that type of content, I'm more than happy to help. And one more note, this isn't going to be an incredibly deep dive on MIDI capabilities. I'm going to keep things simple and I'll elaborate later on, but basically I'm only going to use program change messages and CC Absolute for my expression pedal to control these plugins, because I found that that's generally all you need. So let's talk about some of the things that you're gonna need. You're gonna need a 5-pin MIDI cable. This will allow communications between your controller and your computer. You're gonna need a MIDI controller, something like the Fortin Hydra, a MIDI keyboard, or a pedal board like the FCB 1010. This is the one that I'm going to use because it makes the most sense in a live performance and it is the most flexible. If you have something like a MIDI keyboard, that won't be as useful in a live performance if you plan on switching things while you're playing. However, it will be incredibly useful if you decide to write in your automation, if you're playing with a backing track and you decide to just let the automation take care of the preset switches for you. And for my particular setup, you'll need an interface with MIDI ins on the back. Anything Focusrite, Scarlett, 4i4 and above will have an MIDI input, or you can do research on additional interfaces. Let's talk about MIDI board integration. Probably the biggest problem that I see people run into is the miscommunication between their controllers and the plugins. As you can see from the board, I'm on bank 4, which means that this is running PC messages by default from each button as PC 41, 42, 43, and so on. However, there's a slight shift in the perception of what the plugin receives. Instead of receiving PC 41, 42, and so on, it actually receives PC 40, 41, 42, all the way up to PC 49. This is the problem a lot of users tend to run into and that I get messaged about quite often. Now, going into this, the mindset that I want to have is keep things simple. By default, each button is assigned a PC message. And since PC messages can change presets and toggle on and off pretty much any component in the plugins, I'm just gonna be using PC messages, and then I'm gonna be using CC Absolute with my expression pedals. When you look at the plugin, I'm gonna be using the presets to change my main tones between, say, a lead tone, a grit tone, and a clean tone, and then I'll be able to use PC messages also to turn off individual components like the compressor and the overdrive. And then I'll also show you how you can use a single button to send out multiple PC messages to change multiple components. So let's say I have my main heavy rhythm on button 3, but I then want to turn on the compressor and the delay and the reverb at the same time. For example, I've already assigned PC messages to my compressor, my delay, and my reverb pedals. And I want them all to turn on with a single button click. Normally, button 10 in bank 4 would be sending out PC message 50, which would then be interpreted by the plugin as PC 49, but we're actually gonna change all of the PC messages sent out by button 10. And this is for those of you who have the Behringer FCB 1010 that have asked about changing the individual parameters per button. So we're gonna press and hold the down button. We're gonna hit up till the select is activated. I already have these set up, and I'm gonna go through and then press 1 till it's blinking. Press up to change the number value. This is gonna go out 44 and be number 43. This is my delay active. Since that's what I want it to be, I'll press up to press enter or to save that change. Press up again on the second one. Up 45, which is number 44 on my screen. That is my reverb active. Press up. Press number 3. Up. 46, which is number 45, my compressor. Now, let's say I wanted to activate my overdrive at the same time. So let's go ahead and we're gonna press and hold number 4 until it turns on. I'm gonna click that until it's blinking. Press up to change the number value. So since my overdrive is PC 46, that's going to be number 47. So we're going to say 47, press up, and then we're going to press and hold down. And that's going to save it. And now if I go over, my overdrive should turn on and off with everything else. Now that I've explained generally how I'm going to be using my board, how you implement it is really going to depend on the vision of what you want to play and the limitations of your CPU. I'm going to go through 3 levels of setup depending on your CPU and how advanced you really want your routing to be. And since we are dependent on the limitations of our CPU, we always have to maintain that mindset that we need to keep things as simple as possible. Anything that you can do to shave off CPU usage, absolutely do it. So the first setup is a very basic setup. It's a singular plugin with a MIDI board to control the presets and the individual components. And this setup is going to be good for those of you who only have a single plugin, or maybe you're limited by your CPU, or you're a streamer and want to balance your CPU between your DAW and OBS. And this is going to require the least amount of setup in your DAW because, as you can see, I only have a single audio track and 1 MIDI track. In Pro Tools, once you make a MIDI track, you can select the controller that you want to use, as well as the plugin that you want it to be assigned to. So you can see I have Guitar 1, Archetype Plini, Channel 1 selected. Now let's take a look at the MIDI mapping menu. As you can see, I have my clean main on PC40, which is my first button. Alice in is sort of a variation on an Alice in Chains preset that I used. It's more of a grit tone, with the overdrive off in case I want to then turn it on by hitting my button 7. That's coming up PC41, which is my number 2 button. Then I have my heavy preset coming up PC42, which is my 3rd button, and that's going to be my heavy rhythm, and then I'm going to assign different buttons to control various components of the plugin. Now you'll notice that whenever I'm setting up any of my program change messages, I generally do it from the MIDI mappings menu, and the reason why I do this is because whenever you hit enable MIDI learn and then hit a button and then disable MIDI learn, I actually find it's more useful to be able to write it in here in the MIDI mappings menu and then write it down on a physical piece of paper so that way I have the reference in front of me. Let's talk about a more intermediate setup. Now we're gonna get into interchanging different component parts from different plugins. This will really allow us to personalize our rig. And this is gonna be for those people who have more than 2 plugins, those who have a little bit faster CPU that can handle the load better, and for those who really want to tweak and customize their own personal tones. So as you can see, for an example, I have the pedal section from the Archetype Corey Wong going into the Fortin nameless that has the hex drive and the grind, as well as the Archetype Plini's FX section in the post area. So let's go ahead and start with our pedals. Now you're gonna notice that my button schemes between setups are gonna be very, very similar. Most of my preset changes are gonna be on the first 3, maybe 4 buttons, because those are gonna change the majority of my tones. And then if I wanna control individual components, I'm generally gonna have them on the rest of the buttons. So let's go ahead and go through my presets first. So I have the Fortin nameless set up as my main guitar tone. I have a relatively clean setting on the button number 1. And then heavy on button 2. So you can see from my preset menu, I have PC 50 and 51 coming out of button 1 and 2. And now let's talk about the individual components. So I have the Archetype Corey Wong for all of my pedals. I have the wah pedal on and off assigned to button 5, with the CC Absolute taking care of the wah on this expression pedal. And then I have the compressor, the tuber, the big rig overdrive, and then I have the hex drive and the Fortin grind on buttons 9 and 10. And then whenever I want to turn on the effects like delay and reverb in the Archetype Plini, I can just hit my button 3 and that's assigned to go to the Archetype Plini and turn on and off the delay and reverb. This time I set it to actually just turn on the entire section rather than the individual components because I figured that was going to be just the way I wanted this one set up. Now for Pro Tools users, and this is gonna vary between DAW to DAW, but for those of you who are actually gonna be using Pro Tools, use Windows and click on the output of your MIDI to assign it to multiple plugins. So as you can see, I already have the Corey Wong set to channel 1, Pliny channel 1, Fortin Nameless Suite number 1. I believe on Mac it is Command and then click the output to add additional outputs. So again, for this intermediate setup, the routing is the same. I have a singular track, but you do also want to be cognizant of the gain staging. Normally inputs and outputs aren't really gonna affect a whole lot, but you wanna make sure that you have enough headroom so that way when you activate any of your overdrives, it's not clipping on the way out of your plugin. So you can see that on the output meter, I have plenty of headroom to make sure. So even if I wanted to boost the level out of, say, the Big Rig overdrive, I have the headroom to do so. Now you may be wondering how I set up the individual plugins is if you right click or double click the icons at the top, this will turn off each individual section. So if you turn them all off aside from the pedals, you now have essentially a pedal board. That does differ between the wah pedal because when you activate it and deactivate it, that will gray out the section when it's not on. Now we get to the advanced setup, and this is where some of the more crazy and interesting routing comes into play. Now this more advanced setup is going to be for those who are equipped with very fast CPUs. Like I have the i9 9900K processor in my computer, but then again, this one is generally just going to be used for streaming and not for a live rig. This is also going to be for those who want to swap out heads as well as individual components such as your pedals or effects sections. And there's going to be an additional routing tip that's going to allow your delay and reverb tails to last over your preset switches. And I'll get into that in a few minutes. Now I brushed upon gain staging on the previous setup, but I'm actually gonna harp on it a little bit more and demonstrate it here. So let's go over the routing first. So I have my guitar input on guitar 3, which first up has the Fortin Cali, which is only using the Fortin Zool. I have the archetype Corey Wong, and then I have the Fortin Cali again, which utilizes the hex drive and the grind. Now, guitar 3 is being routed into two different aux buses. The first one is equipped with overdrive 1 channel on the Fortin Cali, and the second one is gonna be the archetype Corey Wong. Now I'll show you something kind of cool in a few minutes on this specific channel. And as you probably noticed, only the head sections are active on these two aux channels, because then we're gonna send these two channels to my impulse response aux, which I'm utilizing the Omega Ampworks Granifier with the EQ and their impulse responses. And the reason why I'm using the Omega Ampworks impulse responses as sort of a summing bus is because I want the sounds to be very consistent between the two different heads. Now I have my impulse response channel going to my output, but I do have a send going to bus 3 and 4, which is my lead effects. On the lead effects bus, I have the archetype Corey Wong. You'll see that I have the pedal section active, which I'll get to in a minute. And then I have the delay and the reverb active. So let's start with the pedals and gain staging. So again, I have the Fortin Zool, which has output at -4 dB. So you can see that I have this set up as just a gate. The Fortin Zool, in my opinion, is one of the best gates that we have. So I have this set up just to clean up that noise in between notes. And you'll see that I set the output at -4 dBs. Again, that is just to make sure that I have enough headroom for the following pedals. For the Corey Wong instance, I'm utilizing the wah pedal on button 5. I have the 4th position compressor on button 6, tuber and big rig overdrive. And then I have this going into the Fortin hex drive. And you'll notice again that I have an additional -4 dBs on the output of this last instance of the Fortin Cali. And that is just so this volume bump on the last hex drive doesn't clip on the output. Now, after this, you go out to the 2 channels. Now, these are gonna be where my presets are at. For my main heavy rhythm, I have the Fortin Cali on OD1 channel. Now, whenever you're not using a specific channel, what I have is I set up a preset called null, which is basically just meant to cut all signal going through that channel. You'll see that I dropped the input, I put the gate at maximum, and I dropped the output, so there's absolutely no signal going through this channel when it's not in use. So you can see from my MIDI mappings menu, I have a null preset on PC32, which is my 3rd channel, my lead channel, and then it's gonna go to the amp snob settings that I like on PC31, which is my button 2, and then PC30 is gonna be clean machine on, so that way I can change between my Cory Wong, nice clean, And I don't have anything particularly special going on with the impulse responses. If you wanted to, you can always change some presets or change some settings on the EQ, or maybe change the settings on turning on or off an impulse response. But again, I kind of want a consistent sound, so I just left this as is. Now, the really fun stuff that I've heard a lot of people asking about, specifically like when it comes to the Quad Cortex, is gapless preset switching. The idea that if you're on a lead channel and you have your reverb, your delays, and you really have this nice lush reverb and delay trail kind of disappears when you switch the preset. Well, the way that I set up this specific preset is I actually have the Big Rig overdrive with the level at 0. But this actually acts like an on-off switch. So whenever I'm done with my leads, all I need to do is turn on the Big Rig overdrive, and all signal is cut to the delay and the reverb, but they're not inactive, so they're still pumping out that nice lush tone, and it decays naturally. So you heard that there was a much more natural decay to the delay and reverb rather than them just cutting out because now they're inactive. And that's pretty much it when it comes to swapping out individual components and choosing your routing structures. I'm gonna go ahead and do a lot of the streaming and actual performance, maybe a little bit of automation, lane changes and stuff like that in episode 2, but I wanted to get the bulk of the MIDI messaging and the routing in the first episode. However, there's still a couple of things that are left over that are gonna really help you along your journey of changing all of this up to make your own rig right. Presets. Presets are absolutely gonna be your friend. As mentioned before, you're gonna wanna make sure that you'll have some null presets available to you, so that way you can make sure that no signal is getting out of a specific channel. When you finally do have your presets, or when you're changing your presets, always make sure that you save often. Even if you're changing the overall output of your preset, you still need to change it, because when you change and go back to that preset, it's gonna have the original output level. And then once you have all of your presets dialed in to perfection, what I suggest is going to the presets folder and then building yourself a custom folder to have your components, your pedals, your effects sections, and your head sections, so that way they're easily accessible and they're not gonna be amongst all of your other user presets. One word of caution, however, if you do end up saving one of these presets again, that's gonna go directly back to your user folder, so you'll have to replace that individually specialized preset once more. Once you've built your folders, if you have your DAW open, close it, then reopen it, and your folder structure will be intact. So for example, I'm gonna take my amp snob on, which is what I'm using, clean machine effects, and then I'm going to get pedals only. I'm going to cut them from the folder, go to my components, and I'm gonna Control V. And now when I turn off my DAW and go back into it, my folder structure will be complete with those presets in that folder. So now when I open up my Corey Wong instance, I have a components folder with my amps knob, clean machine effects, clean machine, lead effects, and pedals only presets labeled. And you really can't have too many presets. If you have something that ends up actually saving you time, saving you clicks, even though it may seem like a small amount, that time tends to add up in the long run. And one last thing, if you end up changing your folders around, you move your presets, make sure that you reprogram back into your MIDI mappings. And if you have yourself a list of where they're supposed to be at, you won't lose your place. Thank you so much for checking out this video. Be sure to tune in for the next episode where I break down, again, how you automate your presets to a backing track and how you get your audio over into a program such as OBS for live streaming. So to be sure that you don't miss it, go ahead and subscribe and hit the bell icon for notifications on when we upload new content to this channel. While you're there, leave a like, share, and comment. And as always, I'll see you in the next video.